Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh Hewitt today, and hopefully just a little one-day stint here. The emergency guest host box, the glass, like you would have with a fire extinguisher, break glass in case of fire. We have a box around here that's break glass in need of an emergency guest host, and that would be me. Hugh has whatever that bug is that's going around that virtually everybody in the country is going through, and it's kind of a nasty one. It goes every bit of 2-3 weeks long, sometimes a month long before you finally feel like a human again. I had it about 2-3 weeks ago, and it took me forever to get over it. For a couple of maybe 2 or 3 episodes of my Dwayne's World podcast, which you can go to dwayne.world and get that podcast. It was all I could do to limp through the taping and get my voice to get through an hour, just because it was so thin and hard to project and talk. And so I know exactly where Hugh is at in the progression of this virus, and he's hoping he's going to be back tomorrow. We'll see, and we'll kind of play it day by day. But today he just has no voice, and he just couldn't do it. So I'm here. And as always, when I get to fill in, there is plenty of news out there to talk about. Donald Trump was in the Oval Office today having a joint press conference or a meeting with the brand new NATO Secretary General. His name is Mark Rutte. I'm supposed to roll my R's to pronounce it the right way, but I speak the Queen's English California style. I never learned to roll my R's, so Mark Rutte is as good as you're going to get out of me. He is the longest-serving Dutch prime minister in Netherlands history, and now he's taken on the role of Secretary General of NATO. Had a lot of interesting things to say. We'll play that video for you as the show progresses. Coming up later in the hour, we have Byron York of the Washington Examiner. We'll be talking about the market and tariffs and the good and bad economic news with David Bahnsen of the Bahnsen Group. Josh Kraushaar of Jewish Insider will be along, probably talking about the updates on the Mahmoud Khalil story, which continues to be kind of interesting as it unfolds. And then we'll round out the show with a chat with Jim Talent about the Ukraine-Russia deal, what's going on in the Middle East, a lot of foreign policy, and maybe some domestic stuff too. Because the Democrats, frankly, are losing their minds, especially in the United States Senate. I'm going to try and walk you through over the course of this hour what exactly the strategy seems to be, what they're trying to do, and how thoroughly ridiculous it is. We are 2 days away from the government shutdown threshold taking place. And, you've got tweets from people like Tom Cotton, chairman of the Senate Intel Committee, good friend of the show. And he says on X a little bit earlier today, Dick Durbin, he of the Democratic side of Senate Judiciary, number 2 or 3 Democrat in the Senate. Dick Durbin has now taken a break from fighting for a pro-Hamas campus radical to now focus on shutting down the government. What a week for the Senate Democrats' leadership. You're in good hands, Senate Dems. There's lots of back and forth going on. Here's the latest. As of midday Thursday, the plan, the quote plan, seems to be from the Democrats. We are going to shut the government down to save the government. We are going to save federal workers by shutting down the government and making sure that federal workers don't get paid for an extended period of time, because at least by not paying them, Trump can't fire them or lay them off or something. That seems to be the strategy that's taking place. What's going on is the House Democrats didn't get their way, and the House Republicans held together, with the exception of Tom Massey, who is a party all unto himself. And they passed the CR, a clean CR. Everybody in D.C. knows it's a clean CR. There's really nothing controversial about it at all. It's about 99 pages long. And in short, what the CR is Joe Biden's last budget that every one of these Democrats approved and signed on and cheered. And it's extending the funding of the last Biden budget through September of this year. Now, why are we doing this? We're already halfway through the fiscal year of the federal government. It starts in September to September. We're already several months into this year, and we don't have appropriations bills because Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, when they controlled the Senate, did not decide to bring up any appropriations bills and fund the government the proper way. So they threw down continuing resolutions, exactly like the ones that the Republicans are doing here to buy Republicans time to come up with the Tax Cuts and Reconciliation bill. Now, all of a sudden, the same CR that the Democrats said was so great just a few months ago when they were running things, now it's evil. Now it's awful. Now it cuts veterans. It cuts this. It cuts that. It's Joe Biden's last spending deal with a little bit of a plus up for military. And that's it. It's about as clean of a bill as you can make. And the Democrats now seem to be, well, losing their mind. Here is what Democrats had to say about the possibility of shutting the government down just a few months ago when they ran things. Be warned, I'm going to play you a lot of Democrats today because nothing explains the absurdity of Democrats than listening to their own words. Here is Chuck Schumer from September, cut 17.
If the government shuts down, it will be average Americans who suffer most. A government shutdown means seniors who rely on Social Security could be thrown into chaos as the Social Security Administration limits certain services like benefit verifications or fixing errors in payments. Our veterans could see regional VA offices shut down and support services put on hold. Some of our military service members could be forced to work without pay. Families who benefit from WIC and other nutrition programs could see benefits halted.
So all this dire stuff if a shutdown happens, and 5 months later, Chuck Schumer is apparently gleefully ready to dive off of that cliff. Bernie Sanders, just a few months ago, had this to say, cut 16.
The truth is that shutting down the government is a serious and dangerous action that we must do everything possible to prevent. Shutting down the government would impact tens of millions of our fellow Americans who would be unable to access government services. It would severely impact federal employees who would not get the paychecks they expected. It would also have a very significant impact on our armed forces. In other words, we must do everything that we can to prevent a government shutdown.
We heard from Mark Warner, the ranking member of the Intel Committee, and he was in the car on the way to the Capitol this morning and made sure to record this for all of you that are hanging on every word of Mark Warner. Cut number 18.
As I posted last night, let me be explicitly clear. No on the CR, no on cloture. We need to move to a bipartisan approach. Let me give you a couple reasons. The CR will cut back on our solemn promises to veterans. It will mean our shipbuilders and ship repair and Hampton Roads will be paralyzed. It takes an incredibly gratuitous shot at the District of Columbia in just a mean-spirited way. This and the whole notion that we're going to turn over the keys with no restraint to Trump and Musk, I am a no.
Again, keep in mind, all that is rhetorical nonsense. This is Joe Biden's spending bill that's extended forward. The same bill that Mark Warner and Chuck Schumer and Chief Warren and Bernie Sanders and every Democrat gleefully voted for just a few months ago. Now that same Senate bill seems to be problematic. That same spending bill that Democrats were trying to jam through and and hold the government hostage if Republicans said no, the roles are reversed, and now all of a sudden, everybody's going to die. Veterans are going to get hurt. Elderly people are going to get hurt. Kids are going to get hurt. They're not going to get their school meals. All this bad stuff's going to happen because the Republicans want to take the current spending bill and just extend it forward. Now, the story gets even more convoluted, but more fun if you're a conservative. I'm going to take a second and remind you that we are in the second week of a month-long campaign to help out Food for the Poor. We partner with them a couple of times a year, and we've done a spring campaign for, I don't know, quite some time. And this one's actually kind of an extra special one because we're focusing on El Salvador, which has actually turned out to be a pretty good ally of the United States. We, of course, saw El Salvador after meeting with Marco Rubio. They are willing to take back and repatriate a lot of the illegal aliens that were in the United States. And they're willing to actually take some of the people that are from other countries that will not accept them. And that's all good news, and that's all fine for what it is. But they've got a need themselves, and they don't really have the capacity to be able to handle the needs of a lot of the kids that are suffering incredible poverty as it is. We don't want them crossing the Darien Gap. We don't want them working their way north. We don't want other countries working their way up to the United States. We want to be able to reach out and not have to rely on government aid and rely on the public sector to do the human thing, the decent thing, and the right thing. And that's what Food for the Poor does. Any gift helps, but if you can come up with $100, it feeds a kid a school lunch for an entire year. 200 gives the same blessing to 2 kids for the next year. If you go to HughHewitt.com, the very top, a banner will load that says Feed Their Future. That'll take you to the landing page for Food for the Poor. Or you can text Hewitt to 51555. That's Hewitt at 51555. Or you can do the old-fashioned way and just call them, 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673. Help Food for the Poor help these kids, and let's show that we don't need federal action to handle problems around the world. We in Christian charity and in good hearts can do the right thing. Now, who can't do the right thing? The Senate Democrats. They're boxed in. Why are they boxed in? Because the House Democrats have spun up the fever swamp on the left to such an absurd degree, they're threatening the Senate Democrats, do something. You have to block this. If you don't block this, we're going to primary you. We're going to come after you. And so the Senate Democrats are terrified of their own base, and they're having to completely turn themselves on their head from where they were just a few months ago. Deep down, a lot of these Senate Democrats, they would be just fine with extending the CR forward. But they have to emote, they have to project and be theatrical to convince the base that they're doing something. So what are they going to do? They're going to try to force the Republicans to allow a vote on a 30-day resolution, CR. Now, mind you, the same CR that's going to throw kids out in the street, throw grandma to the curb, and hurt veterans because it's an evil bill. That same spending bill, they're just fine with screwing those same people for the next 30 days. They just want the ability to come back and hold the country hostage again in 30 days. Republicans are like, that's nonsense. Why would we put ourselves through that? We're going to do this through September because we can. And if we don't, it's your fault. So Senate Democrats are trying to walk this line to convince the House Democrats and their base that we're going to do something. We're going to demand a vote. We just want to demand a vote on a 30-day rule. And in response, and in trade for that, being promised a vote, which we'll lose, by the way, then we'll go ahead and let the cloture thing go, and then we'll take a principled stand on the final vote, which is only a majority at that point. Meaning they'll try and avoid the shutdown and look like they did something in the process. It's a pretty naked stunt, but that's what they're trying to pull on their own base and holding the rest of the country hostage in the process. Now, if they were to shut the government down and this strategy backfires and they have to vote no on it, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania has already announced he's going to vote for cloture. He's going to vote for the final CR. So that's 53 Republicans plus John Fetterman, that's 54. They need 6 more Democrats to achieve cloture to move to final passage. And so what are the Democrats risking by possibly going into a shutdown situation? Do you recall all of Trump's nominees, all the cabinet positions, whether it's RFK at HHS or Marco Rubio or, it had 21 different confirmations thus far. Which pick of Donald Trump's was the most controversial to Senate Democrats that they decided to stay in session around the clock and pull an all-nighter and protest all the way through the vote? Do you remember who that was? That was for Russ Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, basically the country's office manager for the federal government. Here's just a little sample of what the Democrats did in their all-nighter to protest. Let's play cut 20.
Russell Vought, sadly, alarmingly, outrageously, stands on the brink of confirmation.
Russ Vought wrote Project 2025, and now Donald Trump is rewarding him by inviting him into the government in order to carry out the Republican blueprint, and he plans to rework our economy to benefit the wealthiest among us and make everybody else pay for it.
These ideas are dangerous, they are unconstitutional, and they are already hurting real people.
Russell Vought wants to make it harder to afford a place to live, harder to afford health insurance, harder to afford college, and harder to afford to put food on your table.
The organizations that are essentially taking care of the poorest of this country cannot get payments for services that they are giving to these poor communities for the contracts that we signed with them as a federal government, because people like Vought want to freeze those grants.
Because right now we have an administration, a president that took the oath to follow the Constitution, to support and defend the Constitution, but doesn't seem to be reading it.
That we only have a republic if we can keep it, and we can't keep it if we put a man...
Okay, so you get the point with this, right? 24 hours, they're railing against Russ Vought. If the government shuts down because Chuck Schumer can't negotiate his way out of this box canyon with his own base in the House Democrats, what's going to end up happening is Russ Vought's going to have to manage the shutdown. It's going to be up to Russ Vought to decide who gets paid, who doesn't get paid, and who gets laid off and furloughed and who doesn't. The one guy that the Democrats were most terrified of, this is the guy that's going to manage the shutdown that the Democrats hand him on a silver platter. Seriously, Democrats, bravo. That is a heck of a strategy you're employing there. That's just great. I wish I knew what Dennis Prager had to say about this. But in the meantime, you can go to Pragertopia. We're also missing Dennis Prager from the airwaves as he continues to recover from his fall. And, I'd love to hear Dennis's take on what's going on with the Mahmoud Khalil case and just everything going on in the world. And he is making progress. He's on his way back. But in the meantime, you get a little bit of Dennis of old.
When God creates the woman, he says as follows: "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make him..." Now, people get the first word right. A helper or helpmate. But the next word from the Hebrew is a helpmate who is his equal.
You can get more from Pragertopia.com, and that's an interesting clip to play, especially when we had Representative McBride of Delaware, who is a biological male born Tim McBride, now presenting as Sarah McBride, take to a podium and say that it's the Republicans that are obsessed with the culture war and that they're weird. What's weird is somebody on the 10% side of a 90-10 issue calling the 90% weird. That's kind of weird. Anyway, let's get back quickly to what is happening in the Senate. John Thune gave a long address. I don't think he's going to fall for the bait of the 30-day temporary CR as a stunt. Although he could and he might if he thinks he's got enough votes to kill that off and force the Democrats to then keep their end of the bargain and support the cloture for final passage. We'll see. But John Thune didn't mince a lot of words. We'll play that a little bit later on in the hour. But I want to play a little bit of one more stunt that the Democrats did. You have debate, and then you have cloture. And then if you achieve cloture on a person or a piece of legislation, then there's 48 or 60 or 72 hours worth of debate further. And then the debate is over with. And then you have a vote. And according to Senate rules, when you have a vote, you're no longer allowed to have debate because that time is past. It's voting time. The Democrats with Russ Vought, because they don't like him so much, because they're so terrified of him, they decided to repeatedly break the rules of the Senate and try to protest while they were casting a no vote. Cut number 21.
Pursuant to Rule 12, no debate is permitted during a vote. Pursuant to Rule 12, no debate is permitted during a vote. Pursuant to Rule 12, no debate is permitted during a vote. Pursuant to Rule 12, no debate is permitted during a vote. Pursuant to Rule 12, no debate is permitted during a vote. Pursuant to Rule 12, no debate is permitted during a vote.
It goes on for 2 minutes in this montage that the Senate Democrats put out, thinking this helps them out, right? And what is it showing? They are absolutely enormously terrified of the impact that Russ Vought could have at OMB because he's the one that gets the check signs. He's the one that runs the federal government and manages the federal workforce. And if it's somebody that's a conservative that's got the mindset he's going to trim the fat at the federal workforce level, that terrifies them to no end. And the Democrats are on the threshold of turning the keys to do just that during a shutdown over to the same guy they protested. It's really unbelievable. The news goes merrily along, and the crazy nonsense in the United States Senate is running unabated, and it still needs to be commented on. Fortunately, I'm bringing you one of the finest pundits in America. That would be Byron York, the chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Hello, Byron. How are you?
Dwayne, good to be here.
So the strategy, as I can understand it, seems to be that the House Democrats and the base of the Democratic Party are leaning on the Senate Democrats to do something, you have to do something, even though deep down most of them are just fine with a CR through September. So they feel like they've got to answer to their base by now calling Joe Biden's budget that's just being extended forward for another few months. It's now evil, and it's bad for veterans, and it hurts old people and kicks kids to the curb. So the strategy, as I'm understanding it, is we want a promise for at least a vote on a 30-day extension instead of a 6-month extension, so we can go and do this thing all over again in a month. And if you allow us that vote, it doesn't have to pass, but if you allow us that vote, then we'll let the cloture thing go through on the full version. And that way they think they can trick their base into them doing something. Is that the strategy, and does it work, Byron?
I think you have just laid that out pretty well, actually. Look, the what they want to do is be seen resisting this agreement. That's what they need to do. On the other hand, I think they are afraid enough. They've always believed that Republicans always get blamed for shutting down the government. But there was an exception to that a few years ago, and there could be another one this time, because we remember all the Republicans, I guess, except Thomas Massie, voted for this in the House, and every single Republican is going to vote for it in the Senate. Maybe not Rand Paul, I don't know.
Oh, he's already committed to vote for it. He's on the record voting for it.
Okay, thank you. So this is going to be, if the bill doesn't pass, it will be a partisan Democratic filibuster. So if you're in a blaming mood, there's only one party to blame for this. If it doesn't pass and the government, quote, shuts down, which means some functions of the government will shut down, but not nearly all of them. So I think what they are now, they're just in face-saving mode right now, which is, please give us some way to vote against this that won't actually stop it. And if we can do that, we can go say that we oppose this and that we voted against it. I think that's where we are right now.
Do you think anybody on the left is going to buy that stunt?
Well, certainly in the politically aware activist class, the answer is absolutely not. They've seen this all over. There are lots of, there are messaging bills that are created just for the purpose of trying to, embarrass the other side. These are votes just for CYA, and to allow a lawmaker to say to a lesser informed audience that I voted against this or I voted for this, and the bad guys passed it or the bad guys stopped it. So I don't think the politically sophisticated among Democrats will fall for it, but I think they just kind of want to get out of this. They'd love to delay it because, they feel like they've made a lot of progress in the last few days and sort of beating up on Trump and beating up on Elon Musk. And who knows, in 30 days, maybe they could do more. So they'd love to have a delay in this, but the problem is they got to do it now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't want to see a government shutdown. I think a government shutdown would be kind of stupid, although part of me wants to see this play out just for the optics of it, because it's just going to be spectacular. Byron, you remember watching all 21 confirmations of the president's cabinet as they've been playing out, some more controversial than others. Which nominee, can you name which nominee of Donald Trump's was the most controversial that caused the Democrats to go into a round-the-clock session to protest, and even protested during the voice vote of his confirmation? Do you remember who that nominee was that they were so afraid of that they went round the clock?
But it was a voice vote confirmation?
No, they held the actual vote.
Oh, okay.
But every time they did the vote and somebody says, I'm a no, they wanted to speechify the no, and they had to keep getting gavelled down for breaking the rule.
I'm going to have to ask you for it.
Russ Vought of the OMB.
Oh, yes. Well, they do view Russ Vought as kind of the Dr. Evil of the Trump administration, because Russ Vought had been the OMB director before.
Right.
And if there's any theme of the second Trump administration, it is everybody from the president on down learned a lot by doing all this before.
You betcha.
And they came into office this time prepared and loaded for bear to get things done quickly. And especially since Russ Vought had a connection to Project 2025, which, as you know, was for a while the source of all evil in the world. He was a particular target because he's a really effective guy, and you can do a lot of stuff from OMB.
So if the Democrats can't navigate their way out of this box canyon in which they have found themselves, who gets to manage the government shutdown?
Well, first of all, I think that the Democrats are going to get out of this.
I think so too.
And they've found themselves. So I think what they're going to do is John Thune will give them a way to vote for it in a preliminary way that won't stop it. And then when the passage comes, there are going to be 7 Democrats who do their duty, vote for it, and it passes, and the government does not shut down. So that's kind of what I think is going to happen.
I think so too. If it breaks down and the government shuts down, how happy are the Democrats in the Senate going to be that Russ Vought gets to decide who works and who doesn't, what stays open and what doesn't?
That's a good point, and I think the bigger point is Democrats are thinking right now, okay, if the worst happens and it does shut down, and it's our fault, how can we blame Trump? I mean, we've been pretty good at blaming Trump for everything that's happening right now. Can we blame Trump? And in this case, maybe in the person of Russell Vought, who will run, essentially, the shutdown and the restart of the government.
It's going to be a lot more painful for people around the Democrats than it's going to be for Republicans. Byron York, read everything he does at the Washington Examiner. Great reporter. Great insights into D.C. At Byron York at X. We will give you all the content you need to have, whether Hugh's here or not. That is kind of the motto here. Have you noticed, by the way, that if you actually kind of look around, things are a little better? The government, federal size seems to be shrinking. DOGE has saved hundreds of, or at least $150 billion or a little bit more of wasteful spending. The private sector just added 10,000 new jobs, 9,000 of them in the auto manufacturing sector. Egg prices are coming down. Gas prices are coming down. Energy's coming down. Not just the consumer price index, but the wholesale price index, the PPI, came down a little bit. Actually, we've got a cut on that. Rick Santelli of CNBC this morning remarked on how good the PPI number was. Cut number 24.
On the headline, expecting up 0.3, up 0, goose egg, unched. Boy, that is progress. We haven't had a number that low. Well, we equaled it in July of last year when we had another 0. To find a lower number, you're back to October of 23 at minus 0.4. Strip out the all-important food and energy, down 1/10. Down 1/10. That's 0.4 lower than expectations. Down 1/10 also equals July of last year. Find a lower number, you're going back to COVID times, April of 2020.
Now, a lot of people on the left are going to say, that's Joe Biden. He should get credit for that because it's his economy, right? You're blaming him for everything, so he should get credit because he finally fixed inflation. He just didn't live long enough in office to be able to see it. And when I mean live, I mean serve. But here's the reality. Look at what Donald Trump has done to open up the energy sector, talk to Saudi Arabia about pumping more, and look at what has resulted in the reduction of interest rates. I mean, I'm not ready to call Andrew and Todd yet. You might be. You might be in a 7% loan that you had to get a year or two ago. You might be up into the 5s now if you call Andrew. It may be time to start to ease off. 888-888-1172 is where you go to talk to Andrew and Todd, or go to andrewandtodd.com. They did my loan. My loan's in the 3s. I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole, but you know how high interest rates got under the tail end of the Biden administration. Now might be the time because interest rates for the last several weeks have been trickling down. Things are getting better out there. Call Andrew and Todd and check them out and see if now might be the time to make life a little bit easier in the cash flow department. 888-888-1172 or andrewandtodd.com. When we come back, more economics. We're going to be talking with David Bahnsen of the Bahnsen Group. We're going to talk tariffs. We're going to talk about a lot of the other economic sectors and the good and the bad. The show goes merrily along because the news goes merrily along, and there's good and bad out there in the world of finance. We are joined by David Bahnsen, the managing partner and founder of the Bahnsen Group, and a good friend of the show. Hey, David, how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Look, it was a bad day on the market again today. I'm suspicious. I'll ask you why, but I'm suspicious it might have something to do with the Donald Trump whiskey rebellion of 2025 and the corresponding 200% threat of a tariff on champagne and wine coming out of Europe. I don't know what sent it into a tailspin today. Do you have any insight?
Yes, I think it is all part of one underlying story, which is essentially at various shapes and sizes connected to the ongoing threat of tariffs and the uncertainty and the trade war and a little lack of clarity as to what the end run is and where we're headed. And I think there's been some unfortunate messaging and communication. And my own view is one who is generally pretty fond of Treasury Secretary Bessent, pretty fond of the first Trump administration supply side commitments that were there from a lot of the economic advisors, but candidly not very fond of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's approach to this issue. I think markets today were looking for Secretary Bessent to put their mind at ease that there is a little more clarity, a little more strategy, and a little more of a path forward. He had a pretty high profile interview on CNBC earlier. I don't think markets got from him what they wanted.
In fact, let's. It was a fairly short clip, but let's play the pith of the gist of what Bessent tried to communicate this morning. Cut 25.
As I told the Business Roundtable yesterday, as I tell your viewers, what we're trying to do is create economic certainty. We're going to do it with the tax plan. We're going to do it with deregulation. And I also said to the Business Round, I think it was 135 CEOs yesterday, if you came out with a plan similar to what Doge wants to do with the federal government, all your stocks would go up 15 or 20%. It would be considered a miraculous restructuring, cost savings, and put you on a sustainable course. So I think we're not getting credit for this yet. I think we will.
What do you make of that, David?
Well, I think that if the Doge issue were the real big concern, he'd have a great point there. It's just I don't think markets are concerned about Doge. I think the left-wing media is concerned about Doge, and there are certain people that might be in the weeds a little concerned at some of the way they've gone about things. But Doge is not what's driving market volatility. It is uncertainty about trade and uncertainty about economic growth and the idea that the administration appears to believe that we could go ahead and have some short-term pain and even a recession and everything will be okay. That's not the message that markets were expecting in the new administration. It's not the message that markets got from the Trump administration in his first term.
Well, now the news isn't all bad, though, right? And I guess I want to clarify, make sure that you're on the same page I am, or if I'm even close to the same page you are, which is, do you differentiate between like what we're doing with Canada and what we're threatening to do with Europe on the champagne and wine? Is that a difference in substance to you than what we're doing with China on a national security level?
Not only is it different than China, it's different than itself. In other words, the Europe is different than the Canada, which is different than the Mexico, which is different than the Champagne, and that's part of the problem, is that we're not really talking about one conversation. We're not merely talking about we want to be a mercantilist nation now and a protectionist nation that no longer believes in global trade. That's not what we're dealing with. We're talking one day about fentanyl and another day about unfair deals with a country and another day about intellectual property theft. And then the champagne thing comes up and then that'll go away tomorrow, right? That's the issue markets are dealing with, is they do not know what we're talking about because we're talking about 8 different things at once.
There is some good signs within the public sector. Eggs are coming down. Oil is coming down a little bit in price. We saw the PPI number hit basically flatline, minus 0.1 if you take out core. It's looking like things are getting better in some parts of the economy, and the inflation worries are easing off. I guess to me, if this is all short-term bluster to get deals renegotiated and this goes away, I can't imagine, maybe he will, but I can't imagine the president doing this same tariff bluster a year, 2 years, 3 years out. I think he's getting this all out of the way now so that by the end of this year, that part's behind us. He's got the deals he wants, and then the economy just takes off. Theoretically?
Well, theoretically, I don't know that the administration has thought through it as succinctly as you just did in the last 40 seconds. That you should give some of the interviews for them, because that would be a much better way to make the case. But let me give you an analogy to 2017 and 18. What they did then was in 2017, he came in, there was significant and definable and measurable deregulation combined with the biggest business tax reform of our lifetimes, going from a totally non-competitive 35% rate to a middle of the pack, hyper-competitive 21% rate. Done, signed, sealed, not Doge, not executive order, codified into law. And by the way, that doesn't sunset. That was made permanent. That was year one. Then in year two, he started some of the trade stuff with China. The difference that markets are having to deal with now is there's no house money they're playing with. All right. The market was down in 2018, but it was up huge in 2017. Now he's coming in and he risks losing some of that political, not to mention financial capital to get the deals done he needs.
Fair enough. I guess to me, I'm not a big fan of tariffs. I'm just not. I'm not up to speed enough to be able to make that good of a case for them. But what I am hopefully willing to do is to give Trump at least a little latitude and hope it pans out and doesn't set in more than just a bluster to get somebody's attention and eventually get to where he wants to go and cutting deals. But I want to, in our closing 3-4 minutes together, there was some very good news yesterday that was relatively unreported that I smell your fingerprints all over, and it's a very good thing if true. And that is JP Morgan and Chase yesterday committed to end the practice of religious and/or political debanking. And I think you had something to do with it, didn't you? Am I reading that the right way?
Well, you are, and it's been more than just a story from yesterday. This has been going on for some time, and it's been just a tremendous experience and really, really positive result. My view was that JP Morgan was never debanking at the corporate level. There was never a time where Park Avenue was saying, go shut down those conservatives and Christians, but it was happening in the organization and it had to have a light shined on it. And we sued them and the SEC ruled in our favor. And I got to speak at the shareholder meeting and hear Jamie Dimon, who I consider to be one of the most successful CEOs in America,
of course,
say it will never, ever, ever happen again. They took out some of the egregious restrictions they had when they bought a payment processor that was going to allow them to shut people down for not believing the right things. They got rid of all of that. They take our calls whenever we call them. They've worked with us. I believe that JP Morgan has made substantive improvement in the right direction, and they did it because we engaged in fruitful conversation, and I'm really pleased with the results.
I am too. And again, it only takes an instance like this before the entire industry falls in line, right? I mean, is it safe to say we have finally hit this whole peak of debanking of religious people and conservatives?
Yeah, the debanking moment and the overall woke, critical theory, ESG, there's a whole lot of things, the DEI, all of that peakness is in the rearview mirror. Absolutely. Now there's still more work to do and there's more wood to chop, but we're definitely making progress.
But it sounds like they're being transparent, and they're allowing you to verify, so we can trust them. The old Reagan line. On behalf of conservatives, on behalf of fellow believers like myself, I can't thank you enough for drawing attention to this. And this is real progress. This is real improvement. And it came at the hands of David Bahnsen and a lot of his friends. Follow David over on Twitter X at David Bahnsen. And check out the Bahnsen Group if you are an investor. The president was at the Oval Office today, and as is his MO of the early administration, whenever he has a guest in the Oval Office, he'll invite the press in, and sometimes those can go 35, 40 minutes, and they're a pretty freewheeling exercise, and today was no different. He brought in the former and longest-serving Dutch prime minister in Netherlands history, a guy named Mark Rutte. I'm supposed to roll my R's. I can't do that. I can only give you a hard R. Mark Rutte is his name. He is now the Secretary General of NATO, succeeding Jens Stoltenberg. And Donald Trump had a lot of things to say. He took questions from the press, and let's walk through it. Cut number one.
We're going to be discussing a lot of things. Obviously, we'll be discussing what's happening with respect to Ukraine and Russia. At this moment, we have people talking in Russia. We have representatives over there, Steve Witkoff and others, and they're in very serious discussions. As you know, Ukraine has agreed, subject to this, what's happening today, to a complete ceasefire, and we hope Russia will do the same. Thousands of people are being killed, young people, usually, mostly. Young people, we were just talking about it. Thousands of young people are being killed a week, and we want to see that stop. And they're not Americans, and they're not from the Netherlands for the most part. No. They're from Russia, and they're from Ukraine, but they're people. And I think everybody feels the same way. We want it to stop. It's also a tremendous cost to the United States and to other countries. And it's something that would have never happened if I were president, and it makes me very angry to see that it did happen. But it happened, and we have to stop it. And Mark has done some really good work over the last week. We've been working together, and he's done some really good work, so I'm very happy about that. We'll also be talking about trade and various other things, and I think we'll have a very, very strong day. We're going to have lunch afterwards. That'll go, and then we'll see you all later.
Early this morning, the news on the Russian front, as the ceasefire deal was brought to them and the negotiations begin, one of the members of the Russian foreign policy team stepped out and talked to Fox News briefly and said, no, we're not going to accept a ceasefire. And, of course, everybody here that is kind of leaning anti-Trump said, see, there's no way Russia's going to accept this. I thought they were supposed to be a partner. And then all of a sudden it turns out that very quietly in the background, the Department of the Treasury announced today that they were lifting what the Biden administration had done with Russia, which was allowing them to sell oil and gas in Europe. Now, Trump had blocked that in his first term. Joe Biden's administration allowed a variance to that sanction to allow Russia to sell oil in Europe. And Trump's Treasury Department today said, no, we're reimposing that. And Europe can no longer buy oil from Russia and deal with the international banking that the U.S. basically controls. So he kind of just turned off the spigot to a pretty big customer of of Russia, of Vladimir Putin. And so not too long after that, Vladimir Putin came out and said, well, yeah, we're open to the concept of a ceasefire. No, there are things we definitely need to talk about. But he didn't reject it out of hand like his foreign minister did earlier in the day. So this situation is very fluid, and we'll see what kind of happens. But Steve Witkoff is now on his way over to Russia, and we'll see what kind of negotiations are had. Back at the Oval, here's what Donald Trump had to say if Russia doesn't agree. Cut number 2.
Well, we'd like to see a ceasefire from Russia. And we have, not been working in the dark. We've been discussing with Ukraine land and pieces of land that would be kept and lost and all of the other elements of a final agreement. There's a power plant involved, a very big power plant involved. Who's going to get the power plant and who's going to get this and that? And so, it's not an easy process. But phase 1 is the ceasefire. A lot of the individual subjects have been discussed, though. We've been discussing concepts of land because you don't want to waste time with the ceasefire if it's not going to mean anything. So we're saying, look, this is what you can get. This is what you can't get. They discussed NATO and being in NATO, and everybody knows what the answer to that is. They've known that answer for 40 years, in all fairness. So a lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
Let's wait and see how that thing plays out, and that's certainly fraught with all sorts of problems. But the fact that Putin said today that he'd be willing to go along with it, and Trump actually took a concrete step to make life a little bit harder on Russia to get them to the table. That kind of takes away the argument that Trump's a Putin agent, a Russia agent, doesn't it? When you basically tell the EU you can't buy from Russia anymore, that seems to be a pretty definitive step. Let's look and see what happened to the markets today. And it was kind of a knitter down day. The Dow was down 500 plus, 537, I think. S&P was down, NASDAQ was down, and gold. If you're into gold, I think today, if I'm reading this right, it closed at an all-time high. It closed up $47 and change over yesterday. It's up to $29.93.90 at this point, and I think that's an all-time high. I think. If you are in the market to get into gold and think it's going to go higher, now might be the time for you to get in. You should give a call to American Federal, which is Nick Grovich and his team, AmericanFederal.com. Their phone number is 800-221-7694. Look, you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but Nick might have some insights as to why he thinks gold's going to do one thing or another and can advise you. Maybe you have a coin collection you want to have him to look at. Give Nick and his team a call, 800-221-7694, or go to AmericanFederal.com. And while you're doing that, help out our friends at Food for the Poor, will you? We are trying to raise money to help the poor kids in El Salvador who are now no longer making the trek up north to the U.S. and are still, nevertheless, dealing with all sorts of unspeakable poverty that the federal government is not able to help either here or there, and you can help. Go to the top of the HughHewitt.com banner. It says Feed Their Future, or text Hewitt, Hewitt, to 51555. That's text Hewitt to 51555. Help us, help Food for the Poor, help these kids, and you'll feel a lot better about yourself. Let's go back to the White House and hear a little bit more from Donald Trump talking with the media about all sorts of things. Again, he was talking to Mark Rutte, who is the new Secretary General of NATO, coming over to that post from his previous position as Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And here's what Donald Trump said about NATO then versus NATO now. Cut number 3, please.
When I first went to NATO, my first meeting, I noticed that very few people were paying. And if they were, they weren't paying their fair share. There were only 7 countries that were paying what they were supposed to be paying, which was, yeah,
it's even worse.
Could be even worse. But there were just very few countries that were paying, and even the paying, it was at 2%, which is too low. It should be higher. It should be quite a bit higher. But you had Poland, and I remember Poland was actually paying a little bit more than they were supposed to, which I was very impressed with. And they've been actually terrific, and some of the others. But most of them weren't paying, or they were paying very little. And I didn't think it was appropriate to bring it up there, but I said it's going to be brought up at my next meeting. And my next meeting, the first meeting, you want to give them a little break. The second meeting, it began, and I was able to raise hundreds of billions of dollars. I just said, we're not going to be involved with you if you're not going to pay. And the money started pouring in, and NATO became much stronger because of my actions and working along with a lot of people, including Mark. But they would not pay for other presidents, and I don't think other presidents even knew that they weren't paid. I asked, first question, has everybody paid up? And literally, I mean, they told me 7. You could be right, it could be 3, but that makes it even worse. But they just weren't paying. And I said, no, I won't protect if you're not paying. If you're delinquent or if the money isn't paid, why would we do that? And as soon as I said that, you get a little hit from the press because they said, oh, gee, that's not very nice. But if you said the other, nobody would have paid. And the money started coming in by the billions. And, hundreds of billions of dollars flowed into NATO, and NATO became strong.
Yeah.
And you remember that. Your predecessor, who I thought was a very good man.
Absolutely,
actually.
Jens Stoltenberg. He sends his best greetings.
He was terrific. Stoltenberg, Secretary General. And he made the statement that when Trump came in, the money started coming in like we never saw before. Hundreds of billions, actually probably close to $600 billion came in. And NATO became strong from that standpoint. And now we have to use it wisely. And we have to get this war over with. And you'll be back to a normal, much more normal life.
And in case you were curious, there was the obligatory Greenland acquisition update, cut number 8.
What is your vision for the potential annexation of Greenland and getting the potential? Yeah, well, I think it'll happen, and I'm just thinking, I didn't give it much thought before, but I'm sitting with a man that could be very instrumental. You know, Mark, we need that for international security, not just security, international. We have a lot of our favorite players, cruising around the coast, and we have to be careful. And we'll be talking to you. It's a very appropriate, really a very appropriate question.
There's an issue in the High North, so the Arctic. So what you did, so when it comes to Greenland, yes or not joining the US, I would leave that outside for me, this discussion, because I don't want to drag NATO in that. But when it comes to the High North and the Arctic, you are totally right. The Chinese are now using these routes. We know that the Russians are rearming. We know we have a lack of icebreakers. So the fact that the 7, outside Russia, there are 7 Arctic countries working together on this under US leadership is very important to make sure that that region, that part of the world stays safe. And we know things are changing there, and we have to be there.
Wouldn't that be something if Trump actually pulls that off sometime this term? I'm just looking on X right now, and just a few minutes ago over on CNN with Casey Hunt, Jeff Merkley, who is one of the senators from Oregon, who no one will confuse as one of the top 15 smartest senators. He will never crack that top 50. He may not even crack the top 50 of smarts in the United States Senate. He said the best time to take on a tyrant is as early as possible, and this is the moment. So they're digging in. They're going to go to the mattresses. Now, I'm kind of with Byron York, who you heard from earlier. I'm not sure they're really going to do that. They're going to look for an off-ramp. But Jeff Merkley thinks, nope, we're going to shut it all down. We're gonna do it. Here's what Donald Trump had to say about that at the Oval Office today. Cut number 6.
They do a shutdown, and ultimately that might lead to very, very high taxes, because we're talking about a shutdown. We're talking about getting to work immediately on the greatest tax bill ever passed. That was the one we did. It was a renewal, and it's an addition to it. And we're going to cut people's taxes. And if we don't open, the Democrats are stopping all of these good things that we're providing. We're providing the greatest package of benefits that this country's ever provided. The biggest part of that's going to be tax cuts for the middle class and for businesses, small businesses, employers, people that hire people in jobs. And if it's shut down, it's only going to be, if there's a shutdown, it's only because of the Democrats. And they would really be taking away a lot from our country and from the people of our country.
A little bit later on, another reporter asked him about the looming shutdown. And so since he had another bite at the apple, here's what he had to say then, cut 9.
If it shuts down, it's not the Republicans' fault. You know, we passed a bill where we had an incredible Republican vote. We only had one negative vote, a grandstander, one grandstander. There's always a grandstander in the lot. But it was amazing. People were amazed that the Republicans were able to vote in unison like that, so strongly. If there's a shutdown, even the Democrats admit it'll be their fault. And I'm hearing a lot of Democrats are going to vote for it, and I hope they do. This is an extension. But ultimately, we want to vote for one big, beautiful bill where we put the taxes in, we put everything in. We're going to have big tax cuts. We're going to have tremendous incentives for companies coming into our country and employing lots of people. It'll be, I called it, in a rare moment, one big, beautiful bill. That's what I like, and it seems to be that's where they're heading.
Now, keep in mind the Democrats' rhetoric here is, oh, this is an awful bill. It's going to hurt seniors. It's going to hurt kids. It's going to take kids off of subsidized lunches and programs. It's going to hurt Social Security. It's going to hurt Medicare. It's going to hurt Medicaid. It's going to hurt federal workers. It's going to hurt veterans. All the bad things it's going to do. The reality of it is there's a reason why they are willing to, go Thelma and Louise off the cliff here. And Jasmine Crockett in the House gave the game away. Cut number 23.
In my opinion, if we're shut down, you can't be fired. And what does that mean? It does mean that people will not be paid, but it does mean that they will get their back pay. So hopefully we can stop some of the bleeding. We just saw that the Department of Education laid off 50% of their workforce. So I don't really understand why anybody would say, oh, we got to take the high road. Listen, he is decimating the federal government. And you're talking about whether or not we're going to keep the doors open. He literally is shutting down departments anyway.
So, according to the logic of Jasmine Crockett, it's got nothing to do with whether or not the CR is a good thing or not, and whether it's a garbage piece of legislation or not. That's totally irrelevant. They're shutting down the government to save the federal workers. Oh, sure, you're going to be furloughed. You're not going to be able to get paid. And hopefully we think we can sue our way into making sure you don't get laid off as part of an extended shutdown. But we're gonna make sure that we save your job by sending you home and not paying you for who knows how long. Brilliant strategy, people. I'm telling you, that's the way forward. Here was what John Thune had to say on the Senate floor. Cut 19.
Majority Leader. Mr. President, as the expression goes, it's time for Democrats to fish or cut bait. We have 2 days until government funding expires. And Democrats need to decide if they're going to support funding legislation that came over from the House or if they're going to shut down the government. So far, it's looking like they plan to shut it down. The Democrat leader came to the floor yesterday afternoon and had the nerve to complain about the House bill. He wants yet another short-term piece of funding legislation to be, as he said, give Congress time to negotiate bipartisan legislation that can pass, end quote. Well, Mr. President, I'm not sure how long the Democrat leader thinks we should drag out the funding process for fiscal year 2025. Until fiscal year 2026, beyond, we are already nearly 6 months into the 2025 fiscal year. In other words, we are halfway through this fiscal year, and it is past time to get fiscal year 2025 funding situated. I'd like to suggest to the Democrat leader that if he has problems with the current situation, maybe, just maybe, he should have funded the government when he was in charge. The reason we're stuck here voting on a CR for the rest of 2025 is because the Democrat leader refused to consider appropriation bills last year. Senators Murray and Collins, then chair and vice chair of the Appropriations Committee, did a lot of work to deliver the fiscal year 2025 appropriation bills. In fact, they had moved 11 of the 12 bills out of the Appropriations Committee by the end of August last year, or I should say the end of July last year. And 6 of those bills, 6 of the 11 that the Appropriations Committee passed by the end of July last year, passed unanimously.
You can tell that John Thune's not going to play ball on this 30-day thing. He may do it if he can get the Democrats to commit, but he's not going to do a 30-day extension and cave. He's setting up the Democrats for failure here, and Chuck Schumer, the Democrats, are walking right into it. You heard the cut by John Thune and what Donald Trump said about the looming shutdown and what this is about. Jasmine Crockett gave the game away, and she's saying we're trying to save the federal workers by furloughing and not paying the federal workers and shutting everything down. And she cited what's going on at the Department of Education, which has slashed roughly half their workforce. Between close of business Tuesday, they were closed Wednesday, and as they're reopening today, they're rapidly whittling down the federal Department of Education, which is a good thing, because all that money and all that overhead should be packaged up and going out to the states as block grants anyway. And that's where one of our great sponsors, Job Creators Network, is right in the middle of with their educationfreedomusa.com movement. Look, we know that the future of education is going to be at the state and local level, as it has always been meant to be, and keeping the unions out of D.C. And parents know what's best for their kids. Local schools know what's best for kids. Local regions and local governments know what's best for the kids in that region. And you should join Job Creators Network in helping make your voice heard and get active in the education movement, because that's one of the hottest movements that's out there among the Conservative Party. EducationFreedomUSA.com is where you go. EducationFreedom, all spelled out, USA.com. And help out Job Creators Network. As long as I'm talking about that, another thing that the left is complaining about in supporting their CR that was Joe Biden's CR that they were for until they were against is, this hurts Medicare. This is going to hurt people on Medicare. Now, you may be 65 or older. You may be like Hugh and not know a thing about Medicare, and Hugh's a pretty educated guy. There's lots of people out there that are trying to figure out, what does this even mean and what's the best plan? Because there's thousands of different plans out there. There's one entity out there called Chapter, and they're the best ones that we've found. They're the only ones that we've found that literally will take the time and work through your situation and figure out what is best for you and what plans work best for you. The best way to reach Chapter is actually on your phone. Hit pound 250, and then you type in the keyword Chapter Medicare, and it will take you right to them. That's pound 250 on your phone, and you put in Chapter Medicare, and you will be connected to Chapter Medicare, and they'll listen to your situation and what your current situation is, what your needs are, what your health background is. And then they'll start to weave through the morass that is the Medicare industry. I'm still 10 years away from that, and I don't have the first foggiest idea how that's all going to work. But I know who to at least give a call to when that time comes, and it can be for you too. Pound 250, Chapter Medicare is where you go. Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh Hewitt today, as Hugh's voice is just not cooperating with him today. He will hopefully be in tomorrow, but the news goes merrily along, and I am joined by Josh Kraushaar, the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. And Josh, another busy day in the nation's capital. How are you?
Hey, Dwayne, good to be with you, and it's never a dull moment, that's for sure.
It is never a dull moment. Over the break, we just learned that a district court judge in San Francisco, of all places, has now issued a ruling saying that the firings of thousands of federal employees that are probationary employees, meaning not there very long, that were fired at 6 different agencies, the VA, the USDA, the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of Interior, and the Department of Treasury. The federal judge has ordered that all of them must be reinstated immediately because their firings were illegal. They're probationary workers, Josh. I don't know what's illegal about that. What do you make of this story?
Look, the law, the politics of the law. I mean, the thing that makes this a kind of a tricky situation for me is unlike any private business in a bad way when it comes to managing a workforce. So probationary employees are not people who have done a bad job. They just happen to be people who have been on the job for 2 years or less. Politically, you probably want to fire the worst performers. That's usually like what a business would do. But because the government is so unwieldy, they basically just said we want to cut staff, and the only way we can do it legally is pretty much you have this use this loophole and fire other people with less than 2 years tenure and a few other folks that were kind of.
But notice what you just said there. They are getting around the loophole by legally firing the probationary officers that the judge has now said is illegal.
Well, yeah, and so the judge said in his ruling that because it wasn't because the intent was just not, they didn't look at the person's evaluation or how good of a job they did, that they just basically did it in order to kind of do an end around the law, or end around the kind of the point of the law, then that was not allowable. Now, this may get appealed. There may be other interpretations of that. I think substantively this is not it's not. It may be the only way to do it because the government is so unwieldy, and that's the only way they can efficiently, like, in 1 week, get rid of a sizable share of the workforce if that's your goal. But look, this is going to be a headache, and it's possible they end up paying more money for these people and actually end up losing their productivity and having to pay them anyways, and that's the worst case in all worlds, I think. So it could be a little bit of egg on their face the way it was handled.
Could be, but my guess is at some point the Supremes are going to have to step in and take on this issue of rogue justices judges at the district level issuing these nationwide mandates. It's getting out of hand. And look, there are some examples of what Trump is doing that you can certainly make a case about, but every company in America, union shop or not, that hires a probationary officer, those people are fireable at will. You don't need to give a reason, Josh.
Yeah, look, well, like I said, it doesn't. In the private sector, like a non-union shop, you would probably fire the people that are the most incompetent, right? The least productive. That's what normal private sector businesses generally do with when they don't make payroll and they need to make cuts. That's what happens. It doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of Americans that you would fire some of the best workers that are younger just because you're allowed to do so. I don't think that's helpful for getting efficiency and effectiveness in the government. But yeah, like if that's the only way you can do it, and that's how kind of screwed up the government civil service system is, then that's what they decided to do, and now they're going to have to deal with all these legal implications going forward.
I want to shift gears and go up to what's going on in New York today. There were several different protests and rallies, lots of Palestinian flags on behalf of Mahmoud Khalil, who was the lead instigator or one of the organizers of the anti-Jew protests at Columbia. He has now been picked up and detained by ICE, and he is going through the process of deportation. I think he's in Louisiana now. I'm not sure what his current status is. But at the rally today, there was all sorts of rhetoric that was employed, which really kind of made my stomach turn, including by the wife of Mahmoud Khalil, and this was apparently through her attorney who was representing her. She's 8 months pregnant, and this is what her lawyer had to say at the rally today. Cut 26.
I am a staff attorney with the Clear Project and one of Mahmoud Khalil's attorneys, and I will be reading a statement on behalf of Mahmoud Khalil's wife, who does not wish to be named. My husband was kidnapped from our home, and it's shameful that the United States government continues to hold him because he stood for the rights and lives of his people. I demand his immediate release and return to our family. His disappearance has devastated our lives.
Now, let's stop here. She goes on for about another half a minute, but the language they're using, he was kidnapped. Another person at the rally said he's being held hostage. This lawyer said that he was disappeared. They even had chance of bringing him home. The language is very intentional, Josh. They're trying to equate what happened here to this Hamas-loving, terrorist-supporting protester. They're trying to compare that to what Hamas did to Israel on October 7th.
Yeah, look, it's obscene. We know about the extremism and the radicalism of the group. that he's been affiliated with, that he was a spokesperson for. You could disagree. There's a debate to be had over, whether there was overreach and the law that was used to justify, him being detained by ICE and start the proceedings for his deportation. But there's no doubt, and I think what a lot of people on the left and surprised like Chris Murphy, Dick Durbin, people in that ilk have basically whitewashed his record. I mean, you can argue about his legal status in this country, but this is someone who affiliated with,
a known
a
terrorist
extremist organization.
Yes.
I mean, it is reminiscent of it, like back in the, and I know, there were communists in the country in the 40s and 50s, and people who were like, literally, there were people who were deported who were literally, agents of Russia. This guy seems to be as close to Hamas, which, as you noted, Dwayne, committed one of the most, the U.S. designated terrorist organization, and committed just unspeakable atrocity on October 7th. And you have this guy mobilizing people, disrupting class, disrupting students, and harassing his organization, at least harassing Jewish students on the Columbia campus. So, I mean, look, there's going to be a debate about his legal standing, but what seems to be missing from a lot of the conversation is just how extremist the organization that he's affiliated with is, and whether that, and the debate should be whether that's enough to deport someone with a green card who's here in this country.
Well, and again, if we knew about Khalil what we know now, if he were applying for a green card, if he were applying to be a permanent legal resident, would any normal administration let him in, knowing what we know about him now on the application process?
Look, I think it's sort of a real question about our immigration policies prior. That this guy only has been in the country, I believe, was it 2022, 2021? He's only been in the country for I think less than three or 4 years.
Right.
So it's not like he's has deep roots. I believe he claims he's a Palestinian of Syrian nationality, and he's been in the country for 3 years. He was a former student now. I think he was studying at Columbia. And and he claims he has a green card. Look, I think it would have been easier for someone who just had a student visa, who was promoting Hamas or declaring slogans affiliated with Hamas to expel them. I think the law, as I've read a lot of stories about the law on this subject, it's a little trickier with the green card holders. But what isn't in doubt is this man is, affiliated with a radical extremist organization that hasn't, supported terrorism against the Jewish people in Israel.
20-second closing question, Josh. Do you think the Democrats are going to cave, or are we in for a shutdown? What's your spidey sense tell you?
Oh, I am very confident that Democrats are going to not shut down the government. I think there'll be a deal reached, and they don't want to be seen as the party that's, I think there's a lot of unintended consequences that would go their way if they ended up playing a role in shutting
the
down.
unintended consequence being Russ Vought managing the shutdown, which is their worst nightmare. Josh Kraushaar, editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Always great content. Thank you very much for being here. Everybody out of the water, unless, of course, you're a San Francisco judge, which means go ahead and stay in for a while. I'm still shaking my head over that. Welcome back, everybody. Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh, who hopefully will be back tomorrow, but we'll see if his vocal cords have anything different to say about that. So if you missed the news, a San Francisco judge, district court federal judge, announced it was illegal for the Trump administration to use 6 different agencies to mass fire probationary employees. That means employees that don't have full status yet. I mean, you know what a probationary worker is. Private sector does this all the time. It means that you may be on a 90-day probation, or company you may work with may be a year probation. It all depends on the company. But for that period of time, they can fire you at will. They don't have to give you a reason because you're a probationary employee. Once you pass that probationary standpoint, then you've got to give cause, and there's all sorts of legalistic things you have to do. A district court judge from San Francisco, 3,000 miles away from the swamp, said it's illegal for the federal government to fire probationary employees. I mean, I got to call Jonathan Williams over at ALEC about this, the American Legislative Exchange Council, a good friend of ours. ALEC is the crucible for where all decent policy and ideas that eventually hit the federal government come through is through the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC.org/Hugh is where you go. And Jonathan's an economist. He's been, they've been promoting reduction of the workforce and the bloat and the waste and all the fraud going on at the federal level. They've been one of the champions of this for a long, long time. They're trying to get it done at the state level so that it takes root up at the national level. They're right at the front of education reform. They've got all sorts of tax policies that are going to probably have something to do with whatever the final tax package is in the legislation that eventually gets passed in Congress this year. Go to alec.org/Hugh and check them out because, I cannot believe what this judge did. The Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in at some point pretty soon. Before we lose all time in this segment, I want to get back to the Mahmoud Khalil case because Hugh's got the right column on this, and he's talked to the right people about this. If you are a permanent legal resident, you have a green card, you do have a lot of rights in this country that people that cross the border illegally do not have. But one of those is not citizenship, and one of those is not freedom of speech. You don't have those issues afforded to you. And it's not even a matter of free speech. Marco Rubio was asked about this at the G7 summit up in Canada. And at a presser, some reporter tried to get him to make this, you're throttling free speech of a student here on a green card. Marco Rubio was lying in wait and had this response, cut number 11.
President Trump appealed to a lot of Americans during his campaign on free speech arguments and not suppressing speech, especially from the government. But your revocation of the green card, to many, is seen as one of the most anti-speech actions a secretary could take with his powers. How do you respond?
Yeah, when you enter this is an important point, and I'm glad you asked this question. When you come to the United States as a visitor, which is what a visa is, which is how this individual entered this country, on a visitor's visa, okay, you are here as a visitor. We can deny you that visa. We can deny you that if you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa. I am a big supporter of Hamas, a murderous, barbaric group that kidnaps children, that rapes teenage girls, that takes hostages, that allows them to die in captivity, that returns more bodies than live hostages. If you tell us that you are in favor of a group like this, and if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, I intend to shut down your universities. If you told us all these things when you applied for a visa, we would deny your visa. I hope we would. If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it. And if you end up having a green card, not citizenship, but a green card as a result of that visa while you're here in those activities, we're going to kick you out. It's as simple as that. This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way. So when you apply for a student visa, or any visa to enter the United States, we have a right to deny you for virtually any reason. But I think being a supporter of Hamas and coming into our universities and turning them upside down and being complicit in what are clearly crimes of vandalization, complicit in shutting down learning institutions. There are kids at these schools that can't go to class. You pay all this money to these high-priced schools that are supposed to be of great esteem, and you can't even go to class. You're afraid to go to class because these lunatics are running around with covers on their face, screaming terrifying things. If you told us that's what you intended to do when you came to America, we would have never let you in. And if you do it once you get in, we're going to revoke it and kick you out.
So Marco Rubio is exactly right on this, and it's not a speech issue so much as it's a behavioral issue. It's what he did, not what he said. Jonathan Turley, who is of the center left at Georgetown University, was on Fox News and made this exact same point, cut 12.
The problem is not participating in protests supporting Palestine. You're allowed to do that.
Right.
The problem is conduct. This case involves conduct. He was a part of an effort that had occupied buildings, committed property damage, and he's accused of basically furthering Hamas literature, etc.
Again, it's what he did. It's his actions, not what he said. It's a behavior case, not a what he said, what words he used case. In any instance, again, if he were applying for admittance to go to school, to be a green card holder, whatever, if he were trying to come in through normal channels, and the screening process, we learned about him, what we know about him now, would take Trump and take Biden out of the equation. Would any normal administration of any country admit somebody that was that much of a supporter willing to target Jews on campus, not just verbally, but physically? Of course you wouldn't. There is nothing that should be blocking us from deporting him. He does not have the same citizenship rights as others would have. Now, when we come back after the break, we got some sad news to bring to your attention, plus a little bit more of the president at the Oval Office today, and a bunch of other sidebar news that are going on the periphery that are kind of below the fold that you won't hear about too many places, but you'll hear here. Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh Hewitt today. We hope Hugh is back tomorrow. We think Hugh's going to be back tomorrow. He's on the Z-Pack. He's got the prednisone thing going. He's got the treatment regimen for whatever this virus is, but there usually is a nadir. There's a low point in this thing where it kind of saps your energy and wipes out your throat, and that's kind of where he's at today. So prayers for Hugh. Hopefully he'll be back tomorrow. If not, we'll find a way to make do here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. I want to take a minute and just remind you about our month-long campaign to help out Food for the Poor as we focus like a laser on the kids of El Salvador. That country has been actually pretty good to us for this administration. They have been one of the first countries willing to take some of the flights back of illegal aliens that have come to the States. And they're willing to not only repatriate El Salvadorans, but other countries that refuse to accept their population back as well to be cooperative. And the needs of their population are still quite immense. They still are having a hard time taking care of the poorest of their population as well. And we know that the federal government is slashing and cutting left and right a lot of the foreign aid programs like USAID and others. And this shouldn't be a government solution anyway. This should be a human solution. This should be a Christian solution. This should be a private sector solution. And that's what Food for the Poor is all about. If you go to the top of HughHewitt.com, there is a banner that says Feed Their Future. Or you can text Hewitt to 51555. That's Hewitt to 51555. And look, $100 pays for a kid's lunch for an entire year. $300 takes care of 3 kids. $1,000 takes care of 10 kids. That's half of a block of kids can be cared for a year. With just a little bit of generosity on your part. Go to the top of the Hugh Hewitt banner and click on the Feed Their Future and help out Food for the Poor if you can, or text Hewitt to 51555 and help us help them. I appreciate it. Now, very sad news to bring to your attention. Just in the last couple of minutes, we have learned of the passing of Raul Grijalva, who is a Democratic congressman from southern Arizona, the 7th District of Arizona. Let me read to you a statement. The office of the 7th District of Arizona is saddened to announce the passing of Congressman Raul M. Grijalva. Representative Grijalva fought a long and brave battle It was cancer, by the way, lung cancer. He passed away this morning due to complications of his cancer treatments. More than 2 decades ago, Representative Grijalva embarked on a journey to be a voice for Southern Arizonans in D.C. Driven by his community values and spirit, he worked tirelessly and accomplished so much for Arizona and for the country. From permanently protecting the Grand Canyon for future generations to strengthening the Affordable Care Act, his proudest moments in Congress have always been guided by community voices. He led the charge for historic investments in climate action, port of entry modernization, permanent funding for land and water conservation programs, access to health care for tribal communities and the uninsured, fairness for immigration families and dreamers, student loan forgiveness, stronger protections for farmers and workers exposed to extreme heat, early childhood education expansion, higher standards for tribal consultation, so much more. Look, thoughts and prayers to his family. He was 77 years old, fought cancer, and it's something that we are all going to face at some point is our mortality. And we, of course, pray for his family and pray for his eternal soul. It also opens up a seat in Congress. There is now another vacancy. I would normally wait quite a while before even commenting on it. When you have a 2-seat majority that the Congress currently has, it's now a 3-seat majority. It may even free up the ability for Elise Stefanik to have her confirmation hearing and go to the UN, because there's now going to have to be a special election out of Arizona. Lots in play here. I'm joined by Jim Talent, very good friend of mine, and my regular Tuesday guest on my Dwayne's World podcast, which you can get at Dwayne.world, DUANE.world. Jim, of course, former senator from Missouri and chairman of the National Leadership Council over at the Reagan Institute these days. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Doing fine, Dwayne. How are you?
I am doing good. So this morning, the news was that a negotiator on the Putin-Russia team told a reporter from Fox News, of course not, we're not going to accept a ceasefire. And everybody said, see, he's never going to accept that. Of course he wasn't going to do it. Now what's Trump going to do? And then very quietly, we saw news that the Treasury Department reinstated an order from Donald Trump that Joe Biden undid, which gave a waiver and allowed Russia to sell oil and natural gas to the EU. Trump just slammed the door on that and basically reimposed the sanctions on Russia. And about an hour after that, we heard from Vlad himself, who said, well, I'm open to the idea of a ceasefire. We can talk about that. We can negotiate that. It's kind of interesting how things work, Jim.
Yes, it is. And what's happened, Dwayne, is that the president now has gotten on the same page with Zelensky, or has got Zelensky on the same page with him.
Right.
And now we go back to what was always going to be the problem, which is how to get Putin to the table. And the president has talked about, well, there are some sanctions we could lift as part of an agreement. He hasn't really given Putin anything else. I expected Putin to come back and say, well, I can't agree to a ceasefire without more conditions. In other words, he's going to try and negotiate before he ever gets to the table. And then I said to myself, now what Trump's going to do when he does that is he's going to start applying pressure. In other words, a lot of this language Trump's used, that's been the carrot. And then you knew the stick was going to be coming. And we just saw the first one. And there'll be others if Putin doesn't come to the table. But I do have to say that, Putin is winning on the battlefield. He's reducing the Kursk salient.
Yep. And
so it's not going to be easy, in my opinion, to get him there. And I'm sure that Trump understands that, but we'll see what happens here.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what is going on in Columbia University and up in New York. In response to the attacks against the Jewish students there, ICE has picked up Mahmoud Khalil, who is here on a green card, legal permanent resident, but they are in the process of deporting them, and everybody is, of course, flipping out. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, gave a very fine defense and said, look, this isn't a freedom of speech issue. This isn't a constitutional rights issue. This is what his actions are, and he's a threat to national security. Jim Talent, what say you as far as the appropriateness of making an example out of some of these terrorist-supporting students here on visas and booting them out?
Well, Dwayne, two things. My understanding was always that you can deport somebody, obviously, unless and until they become an American citizen, for any cause for which you could have denied them the visa in the first place. Now, if somebody is supporting and actively supporting a terrorist organization, we don't have to let them in the country, and we don't have to get them out of the country. In this case, that's not even necessary because this guy was actually involved in crimes, right? It's not just his speech or his support.
Vandalizing and causing physical threats, right?
And no, if you're not a citizen of the United States and you are here by sufferance of the American people and you violate our laws, you can be expelled. And that was my understanding always of the law. Now, I'm not as up on immigration law as I think the host of this show is. He's a better lawyer than I am, but I don't see this as unremarkable at all. And I think it's not going to be the only person who gets this treatment, and it's certainly not the only person who deserves it.
You know what I find curious in the timing of all this is while this latest round of Colombia in the headlights is going on, Colombia itself finally released today a review of the protests from last year at Hamilton Hall. And they announced, well, by golly, we're going to suspend a bunch of students and we're going to expel a bunch of students. And we're going to finally release our report today that shows we're just not going to tolerate this here anymore. Interesting timing,
right.
Wouldn't you say?
Well, actually, let's relate that to the broader issue. The president and the administration has issued a lot of executive orders controlling the expenditure of money by the executive in the form of grants, et cetera, and also exercising control over employees of the executive branch. Now, in the latter case, I think what we're going to get out of this is a definition and clarity from the courts about what the statutes permit and the extent to which the Constitution may give the president authority over employees, notwithstanding what the statutes say. But on the first point, the executive's discretion to spend money in grants and research and the rest of it, that is very, very great and always has been. And as a matter of fact, one of my arguments for not getting rid of earmarks, I want earmarks to be transparent, but I want Congress to be able to earmark the funds, is because if Congress doesn't control where their money goes, the executive has basically unfettered discretion. So even if some of these grants, they succeed with their judicial actions and they get some of this money to them now anyway, President Trump's going to be there for 4 years. His statutory officers are rapidly being confirmed and going into place. He's going to have control over this money. I mean, whether they like it or not. And if he doesn't want to give it to a university because they have DEI or because they let men play women's sports or whatever, they're not going to get that money.
That's right. That's right. They're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Jim, life comes at you really fast because I had this whole thing set up where I was going to ask you to explain Chuck Schumer's strategy and when he was going to cave or if he was going to cave. And then over the break, in the 3 minutes we were in break, I want to read to you 2 tweets and then I'll turn the floor over to you. Number one is by Olivia Beavers, great congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. She says, overheard outside the Capitol. We're at the rally point, but nobody showed up. The rally point being support for the shutdown, right? And nobody supported it. Then, just a couple of minutes ago, over at Punch Bowl, Senator Chuck Schumer is now going to vote in favor of moving forward with the GOP spending bill in order to avert a shutdown. It was an untenable position, Jim. You've been in these shutdown negotiations before. It's a box canyon. You can't stay in there very long.
Right. And here's how I always put it to people. And I lived with this in the 90s. In fact, the first time we ever tried this, I was in the House and it didn't work. And that's putting it mildly. So if you're going to shut the government down, this is just the position the American people take. And by the way, I think it's plausible. I mean, it's a matter of principle. I think it could make sense to say if there's some pressing problem that the president refuses to address and we have to shut the government down to get him to do it. I mean, it's not an unprincipled position, but basically the American people take the view, if you can't explain to them in 15 seconds why you're shutting the government down, and it better be good, okay,
you're toast.
Then they're going to punish you for it politically. And the Democrats can't explain it. That's especially bad for the Democrats in this context, for all the reasons that you and others on the show have been discussing, that it would simply give Trump and Doge even more discretion now to go after waste or employees they feel are non-essential or whatever. It really would have been an own goal. And I guess it sounds like the Democrats finally woke up and realized it. So they'll vote for the motion to cloture, and then they'll vote against the bill.
And they'll do the protest vote, which doesn't matter, right? According to more of the story from Jake Sherman, Chuck Schumer is set to vote in favor of the GOP spending bill. He will vote for cloture. Just need a few more Democrats to follow him. Just real quick out question. I have about 20 seconds. If Schumer pulls the trigger and votes for cloture, it's going to be everybody else is going to cave too, right? Is anybody else going to stay out in that plank?
Most of them will.
Right.
Well, there'll probably be a few who want to show that they're really the resistance, but most of them will cave. Yeah, absolutely. It'll end up getting 80, 85 votes.
I think so too. Jim Talent of the Reagan Institute's National Leadership Council. Thank you very much. And I'll talk to you next Tuesday on Dwayne's World. Thanks for being here. And America, thank you for being here. Thanks for putting up with me as a guest host, and hopefully Hugh will be back tomorrow. If not, well, I think we can find something to talk about, can't we? Dwayne Patterson in for Hugh. Thanks for being here.